26,000 professional soldiers against 500 knights. On paper, it is not a battle. It is arithmetic. It is extinction calculated in advance. 50 men for every one. 50 blades for every throat. 50 horses for every charge. If numbers decided history, this story would have ended before it began. But history does not bow to numbers. It bends to will. The year is 1177, and the desert wind moves like a whisper of fate across the Holy Land. To the south, rising like a storm from Egypt, comes a man whose name already echoes across continents: Saladin, conqueror of Egypt, unifier of Syria, the sword of Islam reborn. He has forged an empire stretching from the Nile to the Tigris. Cities kneel when he approaches. Armies break at the sight of his banners. He is disciplined, brilliant, patient, and he is certain that the fragile Christian kingdom squatting on sacred soil is finished. Certain that Jerusalem, that golden jewel stolen decades ago, will soon return to his hand. Certain that destiny itself has a line behind him, because his enemy is 8BOY.I in Jerusalem. Beneath stone walls worn by centuries of prayer and blood, sits a 16-year-old king whose body is betraying him from within. Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. They call him the Leper King. The disease has already taken feeling from his right hand. His feet are wrapped in cloth. His skin bears the quiet marks of decay. Some whisper that God is punishing the kingdom through him. Some wait for him to die, but they misunderstand something fundamental. His body is weak. His mind is iron. When news arrives that Saladin has gathered one of the largest armies the region has ever seen, 26,000 seasoned warriors, many expect Baldwin to hide behind Jerusalem's walls, to pray, to negotiate, to delay. Instead, he does something that shocks even his own council. He rides South Point 500 knights. A few thousand infantry. That is all he can gather. No grand coalition. No reinforcements from Europe. No miracle army arriving from the sea. Just men who understand that if they fail, there will be no second chance. Saladin crosses the desert like an unstoppable tide. His army is a machine. Mamluk cavalry hardened by endless campaigns, Syrian infantry, archers, commanders who have fought beside him for years. They move with confidence, bypassing fortresses, ignoring minor resistance. Gaza falls aside. The road opens. Jerusalem lies exposed. His strategy is simple: strike fast, crush the heart. Meanwhile, Baldwin races to the fortress of Ascalon, barely arriving before Saladin's vanguard encircles it. Now he is trapped. 500 knights sealed inside stone walls while 26,000 enemies move freely across the land. From Saladin's perspective, the war is already won. The sick child king is bottled up. Jerusalem is empty. Victory is inevitable. And that certainty, that intoxicating, delicious certainty, is where the first crack forms, because confidence, when it grows too large, becomes blindness. Saladin does not wait for a siege. He leaves a smaller detachment to watch Ascalon and continues north, allowing his vast army to spread across the countryside. Village burn. Supplies are taken. Soldiers load themselves with loot. Units separate. Command discipline relaxes. Why maintain strict formation when the enemy is trapped and dying behind walls? But inside Ascalon, Baldwin is watching that he sees dust clouds splitting, that he sees formations drifting apart. He sees greed replacing discipline. He sees something no one else dares to believe. An opening. His barons call it madness. They beg him to remain behind the walls. Better a siege than annihilation in the open field. Better slow starvation than instant death beneath 26,000 blades. But Baldwin is not listening to fear, he is listening to possibility. And beside him stands a man of fury and fire. Reynaud of Chatillon. Reckless, violent, brilliant in war, hated by many, feared by more. Where others see suicide, Reynaud sees momentum. Strike now, before the giant wakes. Strike the head, not the limbs. The detachment guarding Ascalon is small, complacent. Certain of victory, Petit Dawn on November 25th, The gates of Ascalon do not open in surrender. They explode outward. 500 armored knights surge into the desert light like a released storm. The guard force barely forms a line before it is crushed. No warning escapes. No messenger rides north. Silence falls behind them as Baldwin's army gallops toward the heart of the greatest army in the east. They are not riding to defend Jerusalem. They are hunting Saladin himself. At their center rides a king who can barely hold his reins. His right hand, numb and bandaged, rests against the saddle. His face is partially concealed, silver gleaming in the sun to hide the lesions of disease. But his eyes burn with something that terrifies even his own men. This is not just war. This is defiance against fate. And as they ride, they carry something sacred, a relic believed to be part of the true cross. To the knights, this is no longer a calculated maneuver. It is destiny unfolding. Either they die in legend or they shatter history. Ahead of them, near the dusty fields of Mount Gizzard, Saladin's vast army sprawls across miles, scattered, looting, grazing horses, relaxed. They believe the enemy is caged. They do not know that death is galloping toward them. And in just a few hours, the mathematics of 26,000 versus 500 will be tested against something numbers can never measure. The afternoon sun hangs low over the fields near Mount Gizzard, and in Saladin's camp there is laughter. Armor lies unfastened. Horses graze freely. Soldiers sift through stolen grain, fabrics, jewelry ripped from village homes. Commanders argue lazily over the next move toward Jerusalem. Victory feels inevitable now, close enough to taste that in 01 is looking south. Then someone hears a T. First it sounds like distant thunder, a low tremor rolling across the earth, a vibration that travels through sand before it reaches the ear. Men pause. A few glance toward the horizon. The tremor grows, dust rises, and out of that dust, 500 armored riders emerge, lances leveled, sunlight igniting their helmets like blades of fire. For one impossible second, Saladin soldiers do not understand what they are seeing. The leper king was trapped. The army of Jerusalem was finished. This must be a raiding party, a small harassment force. But the thunder does not slow. It accelerates. 500 knights move from trot to gallop, and when 500 armored war horses charge in unison, the earth itself seems to recoil. The sound becomes a roar, iron striking earth, hooves crushing dry soil, wind tearing at banners. Inside the Christian formation, there is no hesitation. They know the numbers. They know what awaits them. But something has shifted inside them. When a dying king rides at the front, when he refuses to surrender to disease or fate, fear begins to feel like shamed. Their center. Beneath the relic of the cross, rides Baldwin. He can barely grip the reins. His body is betraying him even now. But he has positioned himself where he must be. Not behind, not protected in the rear, but visible. If they die, he dies first. In Saladin's camp, confusion erupts. Form ranks. Where are the Mamluk captains? Mount up, but weapons are stacked. Horses are scattered. Units that should be aligned are miles apart. Discipline, the invisible skeleton of every great army, has dissolved under the weight of premature victory. The first impact comes like a falling mountain. Baldwin does not strike the edges. He does not nibble at flanks. He drives straight into the center. Towards Saladin's personal guard, IT is not elegant. IT is not complex. IT is violence distilled to its purest form. The Mamluks, elite disciplined, veterans of 100 campaigns, rush to form a defensive wall. Shields lock, spears lower. Too late. 500 lances hit like a battering ram made of steel and fury. The line bends, splinters, breaks. Horses crash into men. Armor shatters. Bodies are trampled beneath iron hooves. And then panic spreads. Not slowly, instantly. Because panic in a scattered army is contagious. Soldiers who have been looting moments before now scramble for weapons they cannot find. Commanders shout contradictory orders. Units collide with each other. Horses rear unmounted. Banners fall. Saladin watches as the impossible unfolds before him. Saladin, conqueror of Egypt, master strategist, has faced armies before. He has broken crusader formations. He has calculated sieges down to the stone. But this is different. This is a hammer blow delivered at the precise second when his army is weakest, when confidence has replaced caution. The Christian knights carve a path through the camp like a blade slicing silk. There is no subtlety. They are not conserving strength. They are spending everything in a single moment. Lances shatter. Swords rise and fall. War horses trained for shot combat plow through infantry who cannot brace in time. And at the center of it all, the silver-masked king becomes something almost mythic to Saladin soldiers. It is not just 500 and it is a vision. The cross they came to erase is advancing through their ranks. A king they believed half dead is leading the charge. Rumors begin to mutate into terror. Is this divine punishment? Is this fate reversing itself? The Mamluk guard dies around their sultan, forming a human barrier as Baldwin's riders push closer. For a heartbeat, history balances on a knife's edge. If Saladin is captured here, if he falls, the entire Ayyubid Empire fractures. Saladin understands this instantly. Capture is worse than death. He orders retreat, but there is no organized withdrawal left to command. The word spreads unevenly, breaking what cohesion remains. Soldiers interpret retreat as flight. And once an army sees its leader withdrawing, something irreversible happens. Confidence collapses. Saladin mounts his fastest camel. Not a war horse, a racing camel bred for desert escape. He abandons the shattered remains of his guard and rides south, cutting through chaos. When the sight spreads, the Sultan fleeing. The final thread snaps that 26,000 men do not stand and fight. They run, not in formation, not in strategy. They scatter. They abandon loot. They throw aside armor to move faster. They trample one another in narrow passes. Some drown attempting to cross streams. Others are cut down by pursuing cavalry who have tasted blood and will not stop. The 500 do not kill 26,000 that they break them. And broken men destroy themselves. Behind the knights, the Christian infantry arrives, not to face an organized enemy, but to sweep through a collapsing force. The battlefield transforms into a hunt. Reynald rides at the front of pursuit, ruthless, merciless, cutting down fleeing soldiers without hesitation. W.Y. Sunset. Mont Gizzard is no longer a battlefield. It is a graveyard with the 26,000 who crossed into the kingdom. Fewer than 3,000 will make it back to Egypt. Nearly 90% of Saladin's army ceases to exist in a single day. And Baldwin, 16 years old, flesh rotting from disease, has accomplished what no strategist would have predicted possible. He has crushed the largest army in the region with 500 knights. But as night falls over the carnage, Baldwin does not celebrate wildly. Because he understands something his cheering men do not. He has not killed the lion, he has struck it. And wounded lions do not forget the night after. Mont Gizzard is quiet in a way that feels unnatural in Odromes. No shoutive commands, no distant war horns, only wind moving over a field thick with bodies. Fires burn low in the Christian camp. The surviving knights sit in silence, armor dented, cloaks torn, faces smeared with blood that is not always their own. Almost all are wounded. Many can barely lift their arms. They have done something no army should have been able to do. They have shattered an empire's pride. To the center of the camp, beneath guarded torchlight, sits Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. The silver mask has been removed. Bandages are being changed. The numbness in his limbs spreads a little further tonight. The exertion has cost him more than anyone can see. But when news spreads through Jerusalem that Saladin's army has been annihilated, the city erupts. Church bells ring without pause. Crowds flood the streets. They fall to their knees as Baldwin enters through David's gate. To them, he is no longer a sick boy. He is chosen, a king touched by divine favor, the hero of Mont Gizzard. The treasury fills with captured baggage, gold, war horses, banners torn from the Sultan's camp. A kingdom that had expected destruction now breathes relief. But far to the south, in Cairo, There is no celebration. There is silence. When Saladin finally returns, he does not ride at the head of a triumphant host. He slips back into Egypt with a handful of exhausted survivors. His escort reduced, his pride scorched. Chroniclers struggle to explain it. 26,000 do not simply evaporate. Great commanders are not routed by 500 knights led by a dying child. But the evidence cannot be denied, and humiliation does something powerful to great it can break them, or it can refine them. Mont Gizzard does not destroy Saladin, it transforms him. The arrogance that allowed his army to scatter like thieves in a market gone. The casual confidence burned away. In its place grows something colder, more patient, more precise. He studies what happened. Every report, every rumor about the Leper King. He replays the mistake over and over. Discipline abandoned. Underestimation. A single moment of carelessness exploited with perfect timing that he will not make that mistake again. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Baldwin understands the truth long before his court does. This was not a miracle. It was timing that it was a window that lasted minutes. And that window will never open the same way again. The leprosy does not pause for victory. His right hand grows weaker. His feet demand thicker wrappings. Sometimes the pain is sharp. Sometimes it is worse. Nothing at all. The slow disappearance of sensation. But his authority has changed. In 01, and his court dares question him now, that he uses that authority immediately. Fortifications are strengthened. Alliances reinforced. Garrisons reorganized. Baldwin moves with relentless urgency, like a man racing an invisible clock, because he knows Saladin will return. For 2 years, there is no grand invasion, no massive confrontation, just pressure. Raids grow bolder. Muslim horse archers cross the Jordan at dawn, burn crops before harvest, slaughter livestock, disappear before defenders arrive. Trade slows. Village empty. Refugees crowd into Jerusalem and Acre. The gold captured at Mont Gizzard drains away, paying mercenaries who cannot chase ghosts. Saladin is no longer charging blindly, he is strangling. And then Baldwin makes a decision that reignites the duel. If Saladin rebuilds, then Jerusalem must provoke Jacob's Ford, a vital crossing over the Jordan River. Baldwin orders construction of a massive new fortress, Chastelet. It is not defensive, it is aggressive. It controls the road between Damascus and Egypt. It is a blade pressed against Saladin's supply line. Stone rises day after day. Templars move in. Walls grow thick. The message is clear. I am still here. Saladin hears of it and feels the insult like a slap. The Leper King is not hiding. He is building in his backyard. First, Saladin tries diplomacy. He sends envoys with an enormous offer. 60,000 gold dinars to halt construction. Enough to finance Jerusalem for a year. Baldwin refuses. Saladin doubles the offer. 100,000 dinars. Again, refusal. This is no longer about money. It is about dominance. In 1179, Saladin marches. But this time is not the scattered horde of Mont Gizzard. It is disciplined, coordinated, quietly furious. Baldwin rides to intercept. Despite worsening disease, despite exhaustion, he gathers the knights again. The memory of Mont Gizzard still burns in their blood. They believe they can repeat it. They have done the impossible once, but the man they face is no longer the same. Near Marjayun, Saladin feigns weakness. He pulls back part of his force, exposing what appears to be a vulnerable flank. The Templars, hungry for glory, charge. It is a trap. Hidden forces descend from 3 sides. Cavalry closes like iron jaws. The charge that once shattered an empire now slams into a perfectly prepared ambush. This time, discipline holds. This time, there is no panic. Christian knights fall. Horses collapse beneath them. Formations break not from fear, but from calculated pressure. Baldwin fights, but the momentum is gone. His horse is killed beneath him. He falls into the dust. His guards drag him away seconds before capture. The hero of Mont Gizzard is defeated. Saladin has learned. And with Baldwin's field army broken, Saladin turns toward the fortress that provoked everything, Chastelet. Inside its walls, the Templars understand an rescue is coming, and the revenge of Mont Gizzard is about to be written in stone and fire. Chastelet stands alone. The fortress at Jacob's Ford, built stone by stone as a declaration of defiance, now rises from a Jordan Valley like a challenge no one is coming to answer. Its walls are thick, its towers newly raised, its garrison hardened, but it is isolated, and the army that once would have ridden to save it lies shattered in the aftermath of Marj Ayun. From the battlements, the Templars watch the horizon darken, not with storm clouds, but with banners. Thousands of them, ordered, disciplined, advancing without haste, to their center rides Saladin, no longer the overconfident conqueror of Mont Gizzard, but something colder. Focused, methodical, patient. This is not an invasion. This is a correction. The siege begins on August 24th, 1179. There is no attempt at negotiation. NO offers of mercy. .8 massive catapults are positioned and calibrated with precision. They begin their rhythm, stone after stone, slamming into walls that were not yet fully cured. The sound never stops. Day melts into night, night into day. The air fills with dust, the smell of pulverized limestone, the constant thunder of impact. Inside, the Templars fight like men who understand the mathematics. They repair breaches under arrow fire. They throw burning pitch down onto siege towers. They fight off scaling attempts. They drag wounded comrades away from collapsing parapets. They pray in intervals between bombardments. 0.5 days of continuous assault. The walls begin to crack. Saladin grows impatient. Every hour the fortress stands is another reminder of Mont Gizzard, another echo of humiliation. He does not want surrender. He wants erasure. He orders miners forward. Under cover of shields and archers, specialized engineers begin digging beneath the main tower. Tunnels snake under stone foundations, reinforced with wooden beams. The defenders feel the tremor beneath their feet, but cannot see the threat. Then the tunnels are packed with wood, tar, sulfur, and ignited. The heat builds slowly at first, then violently. The wooden supports burn. The earth shifts. Above ground, defenders pause as the floor beneath them begins to groan, and then the world collapses. The main tower implodes with a roar that silences even the catapults. Stone cascades downward. Dust erupts into the sky. The heart of the fortress disintegrates in seconds. Before the dust settles, thousands of soldiers pour through the breach. What follows is not a battle that is annihilation. The surviving Templars fight in rubble-choked corridors, on broken staircases, in rooms filled with smoke. They do not surrender. They do not run. One by one, they are overwhelmed. When it ends, approximately 700 defenders are executed where they stand. Others are chained and sent north to Damascus as slaves. The fortress is dismantled stone by stone until nothing remains. Chastelet, Baldwin's dagger, is erased from the map that in Jerusalem. When news reaches Baldwin for Jerusalem, something inside him fractures. Military defeat he can endure, but this, 700 of his men slaughtered because of a fortress he ordered built. This is weight he carries alone. His disease advances faster now. His face changes. Flesh recedes. Blindness creeps into one eye. His hands curl into shapes that can no longer grip a sword. He can barely hold a quill. And when a king weakens, ambition wakes. The court begins to divide openly. Whispers grow louder. Who will rule when he dies? The peace faction argues for restraint with Saladin. The war faction, ambitious newcomers from Europe, see opportunity in chaos. At their center stand a man Baldwin distrusts deeply, Guy of Lusignan. Handsome, charismatic, politically hungry, a man with little battlefield experience but great appetite for authority, and he has captured the heart of Baldwin's sister, Sibylla of Jerusalem. Baldwin sees the danger clearly. He warns her. He sees in Guy a hollow ambition, a man who mistakes pride for leadership. But love and politics are stronger than caution. The kingdom begins rotting from within. Saladin does not rush to invade. He waits. He watches Jerusalem fracture. Instead of massive battles, he wages war by erosion. Raids intensify. Farms burn before harvest. Livestock vanish. Trade routes collapse. Refugees crowd city walls. The gold one at Mount Gizzard evaporates. He is proving something quietly, relentlessly. The leper king cannot protect you anymore. Then comes the spark that ignites the final blaze. Raynald of Châtillon, the same furious knight who charged at Mount Gizzard, now rules from the desert fortress of Carrick. He has never believed in diplomacy. He understands only force. Despite truces negotiated by Baldwin, Raynald attacks a massive trade caravan traveling under Saladin's protection. Guards are slaughtered. Goods seized at IT is not just theft, that IT is insult. Saladin demands justice. Return the plunder. Hand over Raynald. Baldwin is trapped. To surrender Raynald would show weakness to his own barons. To refuse is to invite total war. That he offers compensation. But he does not surrender the man. Saladin receives the answer in silence. Then he swears an oath that he will kill Raynald with his own hands. And this time, he will not stop at punishment. He will end the kingdom. The year is 1183. Saladin gathers the largest army he has yet commanded. Not reckless, not scattered, forged by defeat, sharpened by patience. His target, Carrick. And this time, Baldwin's body is nearly finished. But he's not WY now. Genghis Khan was no longer just a tribal conqueror. He was a storm with a name. Entire cities whispered it before their gates even shook. After uniting the Mongol tribes, he turned his eyes beyond the endless grasslands. To the west stood a powerful kingdom, the rich and confident Khwarezmian Empire. Its cities overflowed with silk, spices, scholars, and gold. Its rulers believed no nomadic horseman could threaten their walls. Take tea first. Genghis did not seek war, that he sent traders, diplomats, gifts. But arrogance is often more dangerous than armies. When the Khwarezmian governor accused the Mongol merchants of being spies, he had them executed. Their goods were seized. Their heads were sent back as a message. It was the greatest mistake of his life. When the news reached Genghis Khan, witnesses said he climbed a solitary hill and prayed to the eternal blue sky. For 3 days, he remained silent. Then he descended with a decision that would redraw the map of the world. War, not a raid, not a border clash, total destruction. The Mongol army moved with terrifying precision. They split into multiple columns, crossing deserts thought impassable. They traveled light, each warrior with several horses, changing mounts to keep speed. They carried dried meat, fermented milk, and absolute discipline. Cities that resisted were erased. Bokhara fell first. The Mongols rode straight into the heart of the city. Genghis Khan stood in the Grand Mosque and declared that he was the punishment sent by heaven. Whether legend or truth, the message was clear. Resistance meant annihilation. Then came Samarkand. The Khwarezmian Shah believed its massive walls would hold. He believed numbers would win. He believed the steppe warriors would tire. He believed wrong. The Mongols used captured engineers to build siege machines. They studied weaknesses. They created panic inside the city by driving prisoners toward the walls as human shields. Within days, the defenses collapsed. What followed was not just conquest. It was a warning to the world. The Shah fled, abandoning his empire. He ran west, then farther west, chased by Mongol detachments across mountains and frozen rivers. He would die alone on an island in the Caspian Sea, his empire shattered. But Genghis Khan did not stop. He sent his general Subutai and Jib on a mission that seemed impossible. Ride west, explore unknown lands, test the strength of distant kingdoms. They crossed into the Caucasus. They defeated coalitions. They swept into the Russian principalities. Princes who had never heard of the Mongols suddenly found their armies crushed on the banks of the Kalkar River. It was not even a full invasion. It was a reconnaissance. The message was chilling. If this was only a scouting force, what would the full storm look like? Back in the east, the foundations of what would become the Mongol Empire were solidifying. Trade routes reopened under Mongol protection. Messengers could ride from one end of the empire to the other using a relay system faster than anything the world had seen. But expansion demanded blood, and Genghis Khan was not finished, because now his gaze turned south toward the powerful Jin dynasty of northern China, a civilization older, richer, and more fortified than anything he had faced before. And this war would test him like never before. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China with immense wealth, fortified cities, and armies that dwarfed anything the Mongols had faced before. Their walls were layered. Their cities were engineered. Their population alone was staggering. But Genghis Khan did not fight wars the way others did. He adapted. First, Mongol cavalry swept through the countryside, avoiding heavily fortified strongholds. They burned supply lines. They destroyed farmland. They cut communication routes. Cities were isolated, suffocated slowly instead of attacked head-on. Still, the Jin capital, Zhongdu near modern Beijing, stood like a stone giant take it. The Mongols would need something new as Genghis Khan did something remarkable. He recruited Chinese and Muslim engineers. He studied siegecraft. He adopted catapults, battering rams, and early gunpowder weapons. The Mongol army was no longer just a wave of horse archers. It was becoming a machine. For years, the war dragged on. Fields burned. Entire regions were depopulated. Then in 1215, Zhongdu fell. The city was looted. Fires raged for days. Smoke rose so high that travelers later claimed it darkened the sky for miles. It was a brutal end, and a message to every other kingdom watching. Resistance meant devastation. But Genghis Khan's empire was growing too vast for one man to manage by fear alone that he reorganized everything. He broke tribal loyalties and replaced them with a decimal military system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Loyalty was now to the Khan, not to clan leaders. Merit mattered more than noble birth. A shepherd's son could rise to command if he proved himself in battle that he established a law code, the Yasa. It was strict, ruthless at times. Theft, betrayal, and desertion were punished harshly, but it also protected religious freedom and trade. Priests, scholars, and doctors were often spared, and trade began to flourish. Under Mongol control, caravans could travel farther and safer than ever before. The Silk Road came alive again. From China to Persia, goods, ideas, and technologies moved across Eurasia. Ironically, the empire built on destruction began connecting the world. But Genghis Khan was aging. His beard had grown streaked with white. His campaigns had carried him thousands of miles from the land of his birth. Yet he refused to slow down. In 1226, he launched one final campaign against the Tangut Kingdom of Western Xia. They had once been allies. Now they hesitated to support his wars. For Genghis Khan, hesitation was betrayal. The campaign was swift and merciless. And then, in 1227, during this final war, something happened. The most feared man on earth died. The exact cause remains a mystery. Some say illness. Others whisper of wounds for battle. Legends speak of darker stories. But the truth vanished with him. Before his death, he divided his empire among his sons. He ordered his burial kept secret. According to tradition, those who carried his body were killed to protect the location. Even today, his grave has never been conclusively found, but death did not end his empire. It expanded even further. His son Ogdi would continue the conquest. Mongol armies would storm into Eastern Europe, crush Hungary and Poland, and eventually sack Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. What Genghis Khan began would reshape continents. From the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Europe, the Mongol Empire would become the largest contiguous land empire in history. And it all started with a boy abandoned by his tribe, who refused to die. Because the story of the Mongols doesn't end with Genghis Khan, in many ways, it was only beginning. After his death, in 1227, the empire did not fracture like so many others before it. Instead, it expanded with terrifying momentum. His son, Ogdi Khan, was chosen as Great Khan. Unlike his father, Ogdi preferred structure over chaos. He built a capital at Karakoram, established administrative systems, and continued the expansion westward, and that westward storm would shake Europe itself. Mongol generals Subutai and Batu pushed into the lands of the Rus. Cities fell one after another: Ryazan, Vladimir, Kiev. In 1240, Kiev burned. Survivors spoke of horsemen appearing like shadows and vanishing just as quickly. Then came 1241. Two Mongol armies entered Europe simultaneously. One crushed Polish and German forces at the Battle of Legnica. The other smashed the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi. Knights in heavy armor, Europe's elite, were outmaneuvered, surrounded, and destroyed. Europe panicked. Church bells rang in fear. Chroniclers wrote of demons from the east. No one understood how these riders could move so fast, fight so precisely, and disappear before counterattack. And then, just as suddenly as they came, the Mongols withdrew. Why? Because far away, Ogdi Khan had died. WY tradition. The princes of the blood had to return east to elect a new great Khan. Europe was spared not by its armies, but by Mongol politics. Imagine if that summons had come 1 year later. History might look very different, but while Europe trembled, something even more world-changing was happening in the east. A new leader rose from Genghis Khan's lineage. His grandson, a man who would accomplish what Genghis never fully did: conquer all of China. His name was Kublai Khan. Unlike his grandfather, Kublai did not live as a pure steppe warrior. He embraced Chinese governance. He studied Confucian systems. He surrounded himself with scholars and administrators. In 1271, he declared the founding of the Yuan dynasty. For the first time in history, all of China was ruled by a foreign nomadic power. Beijing, then called Dedu, became a magnificent capital. Trade flourished on a scale never seen before. The Silk Road was now fully protected under Mongol rule from East Asia to the Mediterranean. And it was during this period that a young Venetian merchant arrived at Kublai Khan's court. His name was Marco Polo. For years, he would serve in the Yuan court and later describe wonders that Europe could barely comprehend. Paper money, massive cities, coal used as fuel, vast postal systems. Through Mongol stability, East and West became connected like never before. But unity at that scale came with cracks. The empire was too large. After Kublai, it fractured into 4 major khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. The Golden Horde in Russia, they were still Mongol in blood, but politically separate. And in Persia, under the Ilkhanate, something unexpected happened. The Mongols converted to Islam. In China. They adopted Chinese customs. In Russia. They reshaped political structures for centuries. The conquerors were slowly being transformed by the civilizations they had once destroyed. And from this fractured empire, another storm would rise. A man who claimed descent from Genghis Khan. A man who would try to rebuild the empire through fire. His name was Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. In the late 1300s, he swept across Central Asia, Persia, India, and the Middle East. Cities like Delhi and Baghdad once again saw towers of skulls rise. He claimed he was restoring the Mongol legacy, but he was also something new, a bridge between steppe warfare and emerging gunpowder empires. And here's where the story connects to something even bigger, because the chaos left behind by Mongol invasions helped reshape trade routes. It pushed European kingdoms to search for sea routes to Asia. Centuries later, explorers would sail west trying to reach lands once ruled by Mongol Khans. One of them was Christopher Columbus. See how the threads connect? A boy abandoned on the Mongolian steppe leads to the largest land empire in history, which stabilizes global trade, which influences European exploration, which reshapes the entire world. And we're still not done. Because from the ruins of Mongol rule in Russia would rise a new power: Moscow. The princes who learned under Mongol domination would adopt their tax systems, military organization, and centralized authority. Eventually, that would give birth to the Tsardom of Russia, an empire built, in part, on Mongol foundations. History is not separate stories. It is one long chain reaction. and the Mongols were one of its most explosive links that in 1258, Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis, marched toward Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic world, a city that had stood for centuries as a beacon of knowledge, home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The Caliph, confident in his city's walls and legacy, refused to surrender, and Hulagu's army surrounded Baghdad with terrifying efficiency. Siege engines pounded the walls relentlessly, and within weeks the city fell, its libraries destroyed, manuscripts thrown in the Tigris until the river ran black with ink and red with blood, and the Caliph himself executed, ending the Abbasid Caliphate in one catastrophic stroke. The psychological shock rippled across the Middle East. No city felt invincible anymore. Yet history is strange. The Mongols who destroyed Baghdad would later convert to Islam themselves, ruling as part of the civilization they had once shattered, building mosques, protecting scholars, and weaving themselves into the very culture they had sought to dominate. The vast networks of trade and conquest they established carried not just armies, but ideas, goods, and, unknowingly, disease. By the 1340s, a deadly plague began moving westward from Central Asia, riding the Silk Road, reaching Crimea, and then being carried by Genoese ships into Europe, where within a few years 1/3 of the population was dead, entire villages erased, mass graves filling the countryside. The plague moved faster than any army, and some historians argue that without the Mongols' vast connections, the Black Death might never have spread so rapidly across continents. The aftermath transformed society. Labor systems changed, feudalism weakened, wages rose, social mobility increased, and in time, these shocks helped pave the way for the Renaissance. Meanwhile, in the lands of the Golden Horde, the Mongol rulers of Russia left behind a different legacy. Centralized taxation, military organization, and methods of governance learned by the princes of Moscow, which allowed them to expand and eventually form the basis of the Russian state under rulers like Ivan the Terrible. In China, the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan eventually fell in 1368 to the Ming, yet the connections forged under Mongol rule, the movement of ideas, technology, gunpowder, and printing, remained, shrinking the world and linking continents in ways that would shape the centuries to come. Out of this chaos, new powers rose. The Ottomans in the Middle East, the Ming in China, rising European kingdoms, and a stronger Moscow, all directly or indirectly shaped by Mongol conquest. And yet, for all the destruction and death, the question remained: had Genghis Khan and his descendants been merely destroyers? Or were they, in some unexpected way, architects of a new global world, a world connected in blood, commerce, and ideas, a world poised for the age of empires, exploration, and transformation that was still to come? The plague arrived in Europe around 1347, carried in the cargo of Genoese ships from the Black Sea, arriving in Sicilian ports and spreading inland like wildfire, unstoppable and invisible. Cities like Florence, Paris, and London were soon engulfed. Entire families died in days, streets filled with bodies, churches overflowing with the dead, priests themselves succumbing while trying to perform last rites. Panic gripped the living. Some blamed Jews, some blamed miasma, some blamed sin, but no explanation stopped the spread. The pestilence moved faster than armies, faster than borders, faster than rulers' decrees. Kings and peasants, nobles and beggars, all were equally vulnerable to the Black Death. Villages emptied, fields went untilled, trade halted, economies collapsed, and yet, in this collapse, a new world began to emerge. Labor became precious. With so many dead, those who survived could demand better wages, better conditions, and some seized land that had belonged to generations of ancestors. Feudal lords found their power weakened as serfs fled, towns gained autonomy, and guilds became stronger, shaping a middle class that had never existed before. Knowledge also shifted. The church had failed to protect its people, and in its weakening authority, new thinkers and scholars arose. Medicine began to advance out of desperation. cities redesigned sanitation, and universities grew, fueled by the need to understand a world that seemed to have turned mad. In art, literature, and architecture, a new intensity appeared, a dark fascination with death that would culminate in the Gothic cathedrals and in works that portrayed the fragile, fleeting nature of human life. Meanwhile, far from Europe, the plague continued its march, shaping Asia and the Middle East. Trade routes were disrupted, but the Mongol networks, once the arteries of conquest, now carried both destruction and the seeds of recovery. New crops, new technologies, ideas in mathematics and astronomy. The Mongol influence persisted in Persia, Central Asia, and even as far as India, where local kingdoms observed the chaos and adapted, building stronger defenses, consolidating power, and eventually inspiring the strategies of later empires like the Mughals. Europe, struggling with the same plague, began to rebuild differently, stronger, more mobile, more aware of the fragility of life. In this turbulence, new leaders emerged, bold, ruthless, and ambitious, much like the young King Baldwin centuries before, who had forced the invincible Saladin to retreat. Across Europe, city-states like Venice and Florence learned to exploit trade, fortify cities, and wield mercenary armies. England and France adapted military technology and strategies. Kingdoms once stagnant began to centralize, finance armies differently, and prepare for the centuries of conquest and conflict that would follow. What had been a continent of rigid, feudal hierarchies began, painfully, to become a continent capable of transformation, ready for exploration, expansion, and empire. And in this endless chain of cause and effect, the deaths of millions, the collapse of old orders, the rise of commerce and trade, the questioning of traditional authority, everything echoed the lesson of Montgisard and Carrick. When the old structures crumble, only those who seize opportunity, who act with courage, cunning, or sheer, will survive and shape the next GEBY the mid-14th century. Rumors persisted in the North Atlantic, whispered in Icelandic taverns and in the courts of Norway, about a colony of Vikings who had vanished from Greenland decades earlier. Sailors spoke of strange lights on the horizon, of ships returning alone with their crews missing, their logs full of terror and nonsense. Few took it seriously, dismissing it as superstition, until a small fleet under Erik Thorvaldsson, a distant cousin of Leif Erikson, set sail in 1352, seeking to reclaim the lost Greenland settlements and perhaps the rumored treasures they had hidden. The journey was perilous. Storms struck with unnatural ferocity, and the sea seemed almost alive, tossing ships like toys. On the third week, a fog rolled in thicker than any sailor had ever seen, swallowing the fleet. In that fog, strange sounds echoed, chants, the clanging of metal, whispers in languages that were not Norse. Erik's men, hardened by winters in Greenland, reported seeing figures on the waves, silhouettes of warriors with axes that glowed faintly, as if forged from ice and lightning. One night, a man disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but a trail of blood leading to the edge of the ship. No one dared approach. Finally, they sighted land. It was not Greenland. The coast was jagged and black, cliffs rising like the teeth of some enormous beast. Trees, twisted and dark, lined the shore, unlike anything in the north. Erik and his men landed, and they found a village abandoned, houses frozen in time, smoke curling from chimneys though no fire remained. In the center, they discovered a strange stone altar carved with runes none could read. Around it, scattered bones, but not human bones exactly. Some were human, yes, but others were massive, clawed, and unmistakably monstrous. The men felt eyes upon them, as if the forest itself were alive. That night, the fog returned, and whispers turned to screams. Erik swore he saw a figure, taller than a man, with pale skin and hollow eyes, standing atop the cliffs, watching. No weapon could strike it, no fire could touch it. In desperation, Erik ordered a retreat, but the land seemed to resist them. Their ships wouldn't sail, waves pushing them back, ropes fraying on their own. Only when Erik, exhausted, swore an oath to leave the land forever, did the sea relent. They sailed home in silence, each man haunted by what they had seen. When they returned to Iceland, the stories were dismissed as madness. But in secret, Eric buried journals describing the creatures, the altar, and a warning. There are corners of the world older than men, and some treasures are cursed beyond measure. What was remarkable is that, decades later, sailors from England and Portugal reported strange islands appearing on no maps, disappearing as quickly as they came. Fog swallowing entire fleets, and the occasional ghost ship carrying pale, hollow-eyed figures chanting in Norse. The line between legend and reality blurred. Scholars would later speculate that Eric had stumbled upon a remnant of a pre-human civilization, perhaps survivors of a world before humanity, preserved by ice and isolation. Others whispered darker things, creatures banished by the gods, waiting for the right moment to reclaim the seas, and somewhere in that Atlantic expanse, untouched by time, that lost Viking settlement still waited, frozen but alive in some way, its dark secrets intact, ready to rise again to those foolish enough to seek it. Years passed after Eric's fleet returned, and whispers of the lost Vikings reached the ears of traders and explorers. By the late 14th century, Genoa had become a hub of daring sailors and merchants, always chasing wealth, spices, and secrets. Among them was Marco d'Alessio, a young captain obsessed not with gold, but with tales of forgotten civilizations. He had heard rumors from Icelandic merchants of strange islands, of ghostly figures, and of artifacts too powerful to be human-made. Yet the maps he studied hinted at a link further south, toward the coasts of North Africa, near the shifting sands of the Sahara meeting the Mediterranean. Marco set sail with a modest crew, ostensibly on a trade mission. But in reality, he chased the stories. Islands lost to time, ancient ruins, and the legends of knowledge stolen from the Egyptians in the age before Rome. Their voyage was fraught with storms, as if the Mediterranean itself knew secrets it would not share. One night, a ship in the distance glowed faintly, like the northern lights had descended to the sea. Marco's men whispered of spirits or curses, but Marco, fearless or reckless, pressed forward. They arrived at a remote stretch of coast in modern-day Tunisia, where cliffs met the waves in jagged splinters, and the wind carried the scent of salt, stone, and something old, almost electric. Hidden in a cove, half eroded by the sea, was a stone entrance covered in symbols. Egyptian hieroglyphs twisted into strange forms, runes interwoven with undecipherable markings. Locals refused to approach, telling tales of men who vanished, of towns cursed by shadows that moved under the dunes at night. Marco ignored them, convinced this was the prize he sought. Inside, the sailors discovered a labyrinth of chambers carved into the cliffs, walls lined with jars of strange powders, scrolls of papyrus brittle with age, and statues of beings that were part human, part animal, their eyes made of polished obsidian. In the largest chamber, they found a circle of robed figures, frozen in what seemed like a trance, chanting in a language Marco did not recognize. On a pedestal in the center lay a crystal orb that pulsed with a faint inner light, illuminating the faces of the hooded cultists in a rhythm like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the chamber shook. One of Marco's men, braver or more foolish than the rest, touched the orb. A wave of visions struck him. Cities swallowed by sand, oceans boiling, creatures from before memory walking among men. He screamed, and the other sailors realized the cult was no longer asleep. They had been guardians, waiting, and now awakened. Marco, with a mix of courage and madness, stepped forward. Using words he barely understood from scattered scrolls, he managed to calm the figures. In that fragile moment, a pact was made. He could take one item, one secret, but at a price yet to be revealed. Marco chose a scroll detailing the construction of a legendary ship capable of navigating not just seas, but currents of wind and tide that seemed supernatural, charting paths that no ordinary sailor could see. With it, he and his men left the labyrinth, emerging into the dawn light of the Mediterranean, hearts pounding, eyes wide with knowledge that could change trade, warfare, and power itself. Yet as they sailed away, the cliffs seemed to ripple like water, and Marco knew they had been marked. The cult did not forget. The knowledge they had taken would bring fame and fortune, yes, but also danger beyond imagination. And so the story of the lost Vikings and the haunted Atlantic merged with the Mediterranean, hinting at the secret powers hidden across the ancient world. Secrets that men like Baldwin IV and Saladin would have marveled at, had they known the world beyond their wars held its own impossible battles, invisible and unrecorded, fought not with swords alone, but with forces older than kingdoms. The Mediterranean sun burned high as Marco and his crew sailed along the North African coast, the scroll clutched in his hands like a key to a world no man had seen in centuries. The instructions were cryptic, mixing celestial alignments, coastal landmarks, and warnings about currents that could swallow entire ships. Follow the stars and the tide, it read. What was lost will rise to those who dare. Their journey led them toward the ruins of Alexandria, a city that had been sacked, rebuilt, and whispered about in the tongues of merchants and sailors. Marco knew that beneath the streets, under layers of stone and sand, the scroll hinted at a hidden chamber, a repository of knowledge that even the libraries of Egypt could not contain. But it was not unguarded. The cult's warnings had been precise. Traps, illusions, guardians of metal and stone, and curses that preyed on greed. Landing under the cover of night, Marco's men carried lanterns and tools, the wind carrying a chill that made the hair on their necks rise. As they moved through the forgotten catacombs, the walls pulsed faintly, almost as if alive. Hieroglyphs glimmered, shifting subtly when they weren't looking directly, warning them away, or daring them to enter. They came to a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows, its floor patterned with intricate mosaics that depicted the rise and fall of empires, some not recorded in any known history. I could see the center. A statue rose taller than a man, carved of black stone with eyes of lapis lazuli that seemed to follow every movement. Around its base were vessels filled with an oily liquid that shimmered like quicksilver. Marco approached, the scroll whispering guidance, and realized that one wrong step could collapse the chamber, or worse. As he traced the runes with his finger, a section of the wall rotated, revealing a hidden spiral staircase descending into darkness. The crew hesitated, but Marco's resolve was steel. They descended, torches flickering against walls lined with glyphs that told a story of men who had tried to reach this place before and never returned. In the deepest chamber, they found a circular pool of water that reflected not their faces, but visions of the past. The pharaohs building monuments, the library of Alexandria burning, and strange, winged creatures walking among men, offering forbidden knowledge. Marco stepped closer and dipped a hand into the water. The surface rippled, revealing a chest carved from a single block of obsidian, covered in intricate inscriptions. As he opened it, a blinding light filled the chamber, and a voice, not human, whispered secrets of the stars, tides, and winds. It spoke of ships that could sail faster than the fiercest gales, of treasures hidden under the sea for centuries, and of powers that could make empires rise or fall with a single decision. But with the knowledge came a curse. Each secret taken demanded a debt. Marco realized that those who pursued such forbidden wisdom could not remain untouched by fate. Already, the shadows in the chamber seemed to twist, and the air thickened with the scent of ozone and salt, as if the sea itself had entered the tomb. Clutching a small crystal vial from the chest, one that promised to guide ships through impossible storms, Marco and his men fled the catacombs. Behind them, the walls groaned and shifted, almost closing the entrance. They reached the surface just as dawn broke over Alexandria, the city waking unaware of the ancient secrets that had stirred below their streets. Marco looked at the horizon, knowing that this discovery could change the world, or end it depending on who pursued him next. And as they set sail again, whispers from the past seemed to ride the winds. ghosts of the Vikings, spirits of lost pharaohs, and perhaps even Baldwin IV's indomitable will. Echoes of impossible victories, guiding Marco toward further adventures where history and myth tangled so closely it was impossible to tell which was real. Marco's ship cut through the morning waves. A shadow appeared on the horizon, strange in shape and movement. At first, he thought it was a mirage. The Mediterranean was notorious for playing tricks on the eyes, but soon the sails glimmered unnaturally, black as obsidian, reflecting the sun like shards of glass. There were no markings he recognized, no flags, no pennants, yet the fleet moved with terrifying precision, slicing through the water as if guided by a single, calculating mind. The cult, they must know we took something, Marco muttered, clutching the crystal vial that had pulsed in the catacombs. His men glanced nervously at one another, some muttering prayers, others tightening the ropes on the sails. Marco's eyes scanned the horizon, seeking a place to hide, a port, a bay, anything. But the fleet mirrored their every move, cutting off escape routes before they could be reached. He remembered a line from the scroll, almost overlooked. The islands of the wind hide the path of the fearless. Those who seek must lose themselves before they can find themselves. The islands of the wind, the fabled chain of small, jagged islands scattered across the eastern Mediterranean, rumored in sailors' tales to hold remnants of ancient civilizations, sunken temples, statues taller than castles, and machines of war forgotten by time. Marco knew what he had to do: lure the fleet into waters where he had an advantage. Navigating through hidden channels, his ship almost scraping cliffs and reefs, Marco led his pursuers toward the first of these islands. The cliffs rose like jagged teeth from the sea, with hidden coves and caves that promised temporary sanctuary. As they approached, a loud, metallic groan echoed from beneath the waves. From hidden openings in the rocks, massive wooden constructs, long abandoned, yet somehow still operational, rose slowly. Catapults, ballistae, and strange levered machines hidden for centuries now came alive, triggered by underwater mechanisms Marco had deciphered from the scroll. The shadow fleet hit the trap first. Towers collapsed, chains snapped, and spikes rose from the sea. Ships were impaled, dragged under, or spun into each other by unseen currents. Marco watched in awe and horror. The ingenuity of a civilization long gone had given him a fighting chance. Yet the fleet adapted quickly, forming tighter formations, sending boarding parties that seemed to appear from nowhere, as if the sea itself delivered them. Then the island caves revealed their final secret. Ancient inscriptions covered the walls, warning anyone who dared enter that the guardians of this place demanded a toll. As Marco led his men inside, the floor shifted beneath them. Hidden doors slammed shut and mechanisms activated. Flaming arrows shot from the walls, sand dropped from ceilings, and pressure plates triggered spikes from the floor. The men ran, dodging, leaping, and screaming, guided only by Marco's instincts and the faint glow of the vial beyond nightfall. They reached the inner sanctum of the island, where an enormous statue loomed, a winged figure holding a trident-like weapon that emitted a faint blue light. Around its base were piles of gold, strange artifacts, and more scrolls. Maps of seas no longer charted, diagrams of impossible machines, and warnings in a language lost to history. Marco realized the cult had been hunting not just knowledge but tools, remnants of an age where men and gods might have walked together. Suddenly, the floor shook. The Shadow Fleet had followed them through the hidden channels, seemingly impossible, but somehow aware of Marco's every move. From the darkness came figures, cloaked, armed, their faces obscured, and eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight. The cult had anticipated this chamber, and now Marco had to fight not only for survival, but for the secrets that could reshape empires. Every artifact, every secret in this chamber had a cost. Marco understood it fully now. They had unleashed a chain of events no mortal could control. And as the first arrows and strange energy streaks hit the walls, he whispered to his men, "Remember this moment. History remembers only the bold." Marco's hands flew over the mechanisms etched into the stone floor. Levers, wheels, and hidden cranks clicked under his fingers, and with a grinding roar, the island itself seemed to wake. Walls slid open, revealing hidden catapults loaded with enormous stone projectiles, tipped with metal spikes or strange powders that hissed like fire when thrown. From the cliffs above, mechanical arms swung down, launching nets and bolas that wrapped around the shadowy cultists, flinging them into the jagged rocks or crushing their boats as they tried to land. The cloaked figures attacked in waves, moving like shadows, their weapons glinting with something otherworldly. Marco barely had time to dodge a chain whip as it snapped from above, cutting through torches and the air around him. His men fired crossbows, their bolts finding gaps in the cult's armor, while others ignited hidden channels of flammable resin that shot fire across the floors like tongues of lightning. Every trap Marco had studied from the scroll was now alive, each one striking with precision, as if the island itself was fighting for him. Then came the trident. The massive statue at the center, dormant for centuries, began to hum. Blue light poured from its eyes and mouth, illuminating the chamber. Marco realized the trident was not just symbolic. It was a mechanism, a weapon capable of hurling devastating force. With a heave, he manipulated the controls, and the statue's arms swung in a wide arc, launching a massive bolt of energy that slammed into the cavern roof. The ceiling cracked, stones and debris raining down on the advancing cultists. Some screamed. Others were flung into the jagged water channels outside, never to be seen again. Amid the chaos, Marco glimpsed the cult leader, taller than any man should be, cloaked in black, with eyes that glowed a faint green. He moved unnaturally fast, almost phasing through the traps, directing his followers with cold precision. Marco knew this was no ordinary man. He seemed part shadow, part human, and his voice carried like a chorus of whispers, chilling even the bravest of men. The leader raised a hand, and a wave of dark energy surged toward Marco, shattering stone walls and knocking men aside. That Marco's heart pounded. The vial in his pocket pulsed violently, reacting to the figure. Instinctively, he uncorked it, releasing a burst of silvery light. The cultists screeched, their shadows twisting and convulsing as if in pain. The leader staggered, revealing that he, too, feared the artifact. Marco realized then that the legends were true. This was not just knowledge or gold the cults sought, but power older than empires, something that could change the course of history if misused. He shouted to his men, "Push them back. Use every trap, every channel. Make them regret stepping onto this island." And they did. Spikes shot up from the floors. Chains swung from walls. Catapults launched projectiles with uncanny accuracy, and water channels flooded passages, sweeping cultists into the sea. The island had become a living weapon, a deadly labyrinth where the few could outfight the many. The cult leader recovered, however, and with a scream that echoed through the caverns, summoned a storm within the island. Gusts of wind so strong they threatened to rip the roofs off, lightning striking in unnatural patterns. Marco realized he couldn't hold out forever. The island's defenses were immense, but against this man, even ancient machines might fail. Then Marco remembered the scroll's final line. Only one who embraces the impossible can command the island's true power. With no time to hesitate, he climbed onto the statue, pressing his hands against the glowing trident. Energy coursed through him, burning, searing, but he gritted his teeth and focused. The trident pulsed, the cavern shook, and a wave of light exploded outward, engulfing the leader and his remaining followers. Screams and shadows vanished in the brilliance. When the light faded, Marco stumbled down, exhausted, the cavern quiet except for the drip of water and the soft groan of ancient stones settling. The shadow fleet outside had retreated, as if the island itself had warned them. The sea calmed, and the morning sun glimmered across the jagged peaks. Marco looked around at his men, exhausted, battered, but alive, that he realized then that history had just witnessed something unbelievable. A battle where knowledge, courage, and artifacts older than empires had tipped the scales. The cult was shattered, their secrets scattered across the Mediterranean, and Marco held a piece of power few had ever glimpsed. But deep in the island's depths, hidden passages still hummed, artifacts still glowed, and whispers lingered in the wind. The adventure was far from over. Marco knew this was just the beginning. Empires would rise, legends would spread, and the shadow of the island's ancient power would follow him, and anyone daring enough to claim it. For the rest of history, as Marco and his men recovered, he couldn't shake the feeling that the island had more to reveal. The trident's energy still pulsed faintly beneath the stones, whispering secrets only those brave or foolish enough to listen could understand. His eyes traced the carvings on the walls, ones he hadn't noticed before. Strange runes intertwined with symbols of empires long vanished, from the Romans to the Minoans, even markings eerily reminiscent of the fabled Atlanteans. It was as if the island had been a repository of forbidden knowledge, left behind to test anyone daring enough to wield it. One of his men, a scholar named Lucian, pointed to a hidden chamber behind the statue. The walls were covered in murals depicting battles that hadn't been recorded in any scrolls or history books. Entire armies, clad in golden armor etched with celestial maps, fought shadowy figures with impossible weapons. Ships sailed across skies, rivers flowed with liquid fire, and monstrous beasts emerged from the sea and mountains alike. Lucian whispered, "These aren't myths. Someone saw them, someone survived, and kept their story hidden." Marco pressed forward, entering the chamber. In the center lay a pedestal holding a series of crystal orbs, each glowing faintly like captured starlight. As he touched one, the orb projected visions directly into his mind. He saw the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, strategizing secret wars that never reached the pages of history. Norse chieftains trading not just with other tribes, but with beings who were more than human. Secret orders of scholars, like Proto-Templars, guarding ancient artifacts with power enough to topple kings. The island wasn't just a battlefield. It was a library of the impossible, a nexus where all forgotten power intersected. A sudden roar shook the chamber. From the shadows, a massive creature emerged, half stone, half living matter, as if the island itself had formed a guardian from the very bedrock. Its eyes burned like molten gold, and it moved with terrifying intelligence. Marco realized it wasn't attacking blindly, it was testing him. He dodged its massive fist and vaulted onto a ledge, narrowly avoiding a strike that sent boulders crashing down. The trident pulsed in his hands, reacting to the guardian's energy. He raised it and aimed carefully, not to kill, but to assert control. The guardian froze. Its golden eyes locked onto Marco's, and in that instant, a strange understanding passed between them. The creature bowed slightly, then retreated into the shadows, leaving a trail of glowing dust that formed a map on the floor, coordinates stretching across continents, showing the locations of other hidden powers and artifacts. Marco realized that the island was only the first test. The real adventure had just begun, a journey across the ancient world, following threads of forgotten empires, battling forces hidden in myth, and facing dangers that history had chosen to erase. Lucian gasped, pointing to one of the coordinates. This is near Constantinople, and these symbols, they match the legends of the Lost Legion of Rome. If we follow this, we might uncover weapons and knowledge the world thought vanished forever. Marcos Maid Grimli. The island had given him power, yes, but also a responsibility to navigate a world of secrets where reality and legend collided. The cult's defeat was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, centuries-old orders were waiting, watching, and guarding the secrets that could rewrite history. And Marco, armed with the trident, cunning, and a handful of men loyal to him, was about to step into a game that spanned the entire ancient world. The sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the island. Waves crashed rhythmically, as if applauding the birth of a new legend. Marco felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him, but excitement surged through his veins. The The world was larger, darker, and far more mysterious than he had ever imagined. And now, he held the key to its forgotten past. The next morning, Marco's small fleet cut through the turquoise waves, leaving the island behind, its cliffs looming like silent sentinels. The crystal dust from the Guardian's trail had imprinted itself in Marco's mind, and each island, cove, and coastal ruin he passed seemed to hum with hidden meaning. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, by men, by creatures, or perhaps by forces older than empires. Their first stop was an uncharted island near Crete. The locals had long abandoned it, leaving broken columns half buried in sand and strange, serpentine statues guarding the cliffs. Marco's men unearthed a vault beneath the largest statue. Inside lay a bronze chest covered in layers of rust, but inside shimmered weapons that didn't follow any design known to history. Swords with edges sharper than steel, curved like crescent moons, with runes that glowed faintly, even in the dim light. Shields, etched with star maps, seemed to shift slightly as the angle of the light changed. Marco realized these were relics of the so-called Atlantean survivors, artifacts that legends claimed were lost when Atlantis fell. That night, as the crew camped on the cliffs, strange lights danced across the horizon. At first, they assumed it was the glimmer of distant ships, but the lights moved in patterns no human could replicate, tracing geometric paths across the sky. Then came the whispers, faint voices carried on the wind, speaking in tongues none of them could understand. Yet Marco felt he knew what they said. They spoke of trials, of guardians, of knowledge that demanded courage and cunning beyond any mortal measure. He clenched the trident tighter, feeling its pulse sync with the rhythm of the lights, as if the island itself had sent him a warning. The path ahead would not be easy, and not all who followed it would survive. The next leg of the journey brought them to the ruins of Alexandria, where the remnants of the great library lay buried beneath sand and salt. Marco's men dug feverishly, uncovering scrolls and codices sealed in magically preserved cases. Some spoke of long-lost engineering marvels, others of celestial alignments capable of predicting wars or natural disasters centuries in advance. One scroll described a weapon known as the Sun Spear, said to harness the energy of the heavens and focus it like a lance capable of piercing the strongest fortifications. Marco knew at once this was connected to the power of the trident, the island, the relics, and now these manuscripts were all pieces of a puzzle that stretched across the ancient world. But the further they explored, the more Marco felt the eyes of others upon them. On the third night, a ship approached under the cover of darkness, its sails black as pitch. A single figure stood at the prow, a man cloaked in crimson, his face hidden beneath a golden mask shaped like a lion. He hailed Marco, speaking in a perfect blend of Arabic, Greek, and Latin. "I've been waiting for you, son of the Trident. The Guardians know you, and the world you awaken will not thank you for what you seek." Before Marco could reply, the man revealed a small device, an orb that shimmered like liquid silver. It projected a vision, entire cities swallowed by shadow, empires falling as unseen forces manipulated kings and generals, mythical beasts emerging from seas and mountains alike. "This is what your quest will unleash," the man said. "Knowledge, yes, power, yes, but also chaos. The world you know is only the surface. The depths hide truths mortals were never meant to see." Marco felt the weight of it pressing on him. He could turn back, abandon the trident, live a quiet life, but the pulse of destiny, the surge of power beneath his fingertips, was intoxicating. He nodded. "Then we proceed. We learn, we fight, and we survive. Whatever waits for us, we face it." The masked man inclined his head, vanished in the night mist, leaving behind only a feathered emblem and the echo of laughter that seemed to belong to no one. Marco looked at his men. They were tired, wary, but their loyalty had been forged in fire. They would follow him across seas, deserts, and mountains into the realms of legend and nightmare, because they believed, not in the trident, but in the man who wielded it. As dawn broke, the fleet set sail again, bound for Cyprus, Rhodes, and the hidden coasts of forgotten empires. Marco knew the journey would lead him into ancient crypts, hidden temples, and battles that would test not only skill and strength, but the very essence of reality itself. Somewhere between myth and memory lay the secrets of the ancients, and Marco would uncover them, piece by piece, risking life and sanity with every step. The wind carried the fleet eastward, the sun burning gold across the waves, until Rhodes appeared like a jewel rising from the sea. The island was a maze of white stone streets, fortified walls, and a faint whisper of history etched into every column and archway. Marco knew the Order of the Sun, a secretive brotherhood of knights, had been rumored to protect something powerful here, an artifact older than the trident itself, said to contain knowledge that could bend the mind as much as it could sharpen the sword. Disguised as merchants, Marco and his men slipped into the bustling harbor city. Their guide was an eccentric historian named Phileas, who insisted he could navigate the underground network of tunnels that ran beneath the knight's fortress. Many have tried, Phileas warned, but the Order does not forgive curiosity. The walls themselves are alive in a way you cannot see, shifting to confuse intruders and the statues they watch. As they entered the first tunnel, Marco felt the air thicken. Shadows moved against the torchlight, yet there was no one there. Phileas muttered incantations under his breath, tracing symbols along the walls, and the passage seemed to stretch unnaturally, a corridor that twisted and turned beyond normal geometry. Suddenly, a stone door slammed shut behind them, and glowing glyphs appeared in the air, warnings in a language older than Rome. Marco raised the trident, and its pulse resonated against the carvings. The light flared, dissolving the glyphs, and the door slid open with a grinding echo. Deeper within, they found a chamber lined with mirrors. At first, Marco thought it a trap of reflection, but soon the images in the mirrors began to move independently, forming scenes from the past. Knights dueling, flames consuming temples, and a figure draped in gold and crimson who seemed to be guiding their hand from the shadows. One mirror shuddered, cracked, and a whisper came through. Only the worthy may claim the sun shard. We are hard endure what lies beyond. Marco ignored the unease curling in his chest. He stepped forward, his reflection splitting into countless versions of himself. One by one, the mirrored selves lunged, forming illusions of combat. Each strike he parried with the trident felt painfully real, and for a moment he questioned whether he was fighting the mirrors or his own fears. With a final surge of will, he shattered the central mirror. A shaft of sunlight pierced the room, revealing a pedestal, and upon it the sun shard, a crystal pulsating with molten fire, humming with the same resonance as the trident. Before he could reach it, the air shimmered, and the cloaked figure from the sea appeared, the one with the golden lion mask. "You grasp at power, Marco," the figure said, voice echoing as if from multiple mouths. "But every choice has consequence. Take the shard, and you awaken forces that will not forget. Leave it, and the world may remain unaware of the depths beneath history. Choose wisely." Marco's hand hovered over the crystal. The trident pulsed faster, almost desperate. Around him, his men waited, sweat and fear lining their faces. Time seemed to stop, the walls themselves holding their breath. Marco's mind raced. Legends, prophecies, and whispered warnings from every island he had visited screamed in unison. Then he remembered the Guardian's words from the first island. "Courage shapes destiny, but wisdom guides it." With a steadying breath, Marco seized the sun shard. A wave of light erupted, knocking everyone off their feet. Statues groaned and shifted. Tunnels began to collapse. Yet the trident and the shard glowed in perfect harmony. Marco felt power, yes, but also knowledge, as if the sun shard was feeding him glimpses of past and future. Empires rising and falling, forgotten rituals, and the hidden threads that connected all civilizations. As dust settled and the echoes faded, Marco looked at his men. They were battered, shaken, but alive. The sun shard's energy was theirs to command, but with it came responsibility, danger, and perhaps enemies who have been waiting centuries for someone foolish enough or brave enough to find it. The journey was no longer just about relics or treasure. It was about surviving a world that blurred the lines between myth and reality. And Marco knew the next challenge would demand everything he had, and more. The heat of the Egyptian desert was relentless, waves of sand rippling like liquid gold beneath the blazing sun. Marco and his men pressed onward, the sun shard strapped to his chest, its pulsing light seemingly guiding their path. Every grain of sand seemed to hum with hidden power, as if the desert itself were aware of the relic's presence. They arrived at a ruined temple, half buried by centuries of sandstorms, its entrance flanked by statues of jackals and serpents. Phileas whispered, "This is the temple of the hidden eye. A cult devoted to ancient gods older than the pharaohs has guarded secrets here for millennia. They do not take kindly to intruders." Marco only nodded, tightening his grip on the trident. They stepped inside, torches flickering against walls carved with serpentine symbols and scenes of otherworldly rituals. The tea first. The temple was eerily silent. Then came the hum, low at first, then growing, vibrating through the stone and into their bones. Shadows moved independently of their own, forming the shapes of worshippers in eternal devotion or eternal damnation. The cult's guardians emerged, figures in golden masks, cloaked in desert cloth, wielding curved blades that glowed faintly, as if lit by fire that burned beneath reality itself. Marco realized this was not a conventional fight. The temple itself seemed alive, its walls shifting, corridors stretching, ceilings lowering to trap them. Every step forward was met with a puzzle. Pressure plates, hidden blades, illusions designed to disorient and terrify. One misstep and the floor would give way into pits of writhing serpents, the air filled with the smell of sulfur and decay. "Stick to the shard's pulse," Phileas urged, and Marco followed the resonance like a heartbeat, the crystal lighting their path. They passed chambers where murals seemed to move, snakes swallowing suns, jackals walking across rivers of blood, and a figure with countless eyes observing everything, judging, waiting. Marco could feel the power of the shard reacting to these visions, giving him knowledge, clarity, and courage. In the innermost sanctum, they found a basin of black water, reflective as glass, yet showing visions not of themselves, but of the world as it could be, and as it had been. From the shadows, the cult's high priest emerged, draped in robes covered with hieroglyphs that glimmered in the torchlight. His voice was like wind through tombs. "You carry what should never be touched. The sun shard is not a prize, but a responsibility, and only those willing to face what lies beyond the veil may live." Without warning, the basin erupted, water coiling into serpentine shapes that lunged like living weapons. Marco's men barely dodged, trident flashing, the shard's light blinding the monstrous forms. The room became a storm of steel, magic, and reflexes sharpened by desperation. Every strike Marco made seemed to resonate with the shard, splitting illusions from reality, turning spectral snakes into smoke, walls back into solid stone. The priest approached, unarmed, his hands raised. "You have courage, but do you have understanding?" he asked, eyes glowing beneath the golden mask. Marco realized the only way to survive was not brute force, but cleverness. Following the shard's pulse, he touched the basin, letting its visions flow into his mind. Knowledge of secret paths, hidden chambers, and the cult's weaknesses flooded him. He moved faster than thought, disabling traps and leading his men through a twisting sequence of corridors only he could perceive by the time the priest realized what had happened. Marco and his men were outside the temple, sand and wind swirling around them as dawn broke. Behind them, the temple seemed to sigh, settling once again into ruin, as if it had never been disturbed. The cult would not forget this intrusion, and Marco knew they had made enemies that could reach into kingdoms, deserts, and seas. But for now, the shard was theirs, and the desert had yielded its secrets. Marco looked at the horizon, where pyramids rose like sentinels against the rising sun. Beyond those ancient stones, other dangers awaited. Mercenaries, rival treasure hunters, and forces older than any empire. And somewhere, in the heart of history itself, powers stirred, sensing the sun's shard had awakened. Marco mounted his horse, the trident in one hand, the sun shard glowing against his chest, and pressed on, knowing the desert was only the beginning of a journey that could rewrite what people believed possible, blending myth, legend, and the ambitions of men into a tale that might one day become the stuff of true legend. Marco's caravan pressed on, the sun casting sharp shadows over the endless sands of Nubia. Each night, the horizon seemed to ripple as though the desert itself breathed, and travelers whispered of a city that appeared only when a moon was full, its walls glittering like gold, yet dissolving into mist before dawn. They passed ancient ruins, half buried in sand, adorned with carvings that seemed alive, twisting and changing when viewed from different angles. Some claimed they saw figures moving inside the shadows, statues that blinked, and echoes of laughter that belonged to no living soul. One evening, a sudden sandstorm erupted, so fierce it swallowed the horizon, and Marco found himself separated from his guides. In the chaos, he stumbled upon a narrow canyon, and in its shadows, a hidden oasis glimmered with impossible water, pure as crystal. In the center stood a tower of black stone, etched with inscriptions in a language Marco could not read, yet somehow understood. The warnings of a city cursed to trap all who entered. Ignoring the dread crawling up his spine, he climbed the tower's spiral stair, each step creaking as though alive. At the top, he looked out and saw the phantom city rise from the desert, golden minarets glowing in the twilight, but the sands were moving unnaturally, forming shapes like hands, claws, reaching. A voice whispered through the wind, promising wealth and knowledge beyond imagination. If he would only step forward. Marco's heart pounded. He felt the pull of greed and curiosity twisting into fear. One wrong move, and the desert would claim him as it had countless others. The moment Marco stepped into the golden streets of the phantom city, the air shifted. It was cooler, almost fragrant with something unearthly, jasmine, myrrh, and something darker he could not name. The buildings were impossibly tall, carved from a stone that shimmered in colors the eye struggled to grasp. Windows reflected not the outside, but visions of other places, mountains that didn't exist, seas filled with black water under green skies. Shadows moved independently, stretching across alleys and corners, and Marco felt their gaze upon him. He wandered deeper, drawn to a square at the heart of the city. A fountain of liquid gold trickled endlessly, forming shapes that seemed to whisper names of kings and conquerors long forgotten. Around it, hooded figures performed a silent ritual, circling the fountain, their chants low but vibrating through Marco's bones. Every now and then, a figure would lift a hand, and a column of light would shoot into the sky, then vanish, leaving behind a single glowing object, a relic or talisman that throbbed with power. Marco felt compelled to touch one, but fear rooted him in place. The city seemed alive. Streets rearranged themselves behind him. Alleys he had walked through before now led to entirely different squares. In one sudden twist, he emerged in a marketplace, but no one was there except shadows of merchants and animals, dogs, camels, hawks, transparent, and whispering in voices that sounded like both men and wind. In a stall, Marco saw a map that wasn't a map, showing places he had never heard of, yet the terrain felt oddly familiar, as if some part of him already knew them. One corner of the map glowed, a desert, a tower, and a crimson mark pulsing steadily. His instincts told him that was where the city's secret Lys night fell. The city's golden glow intensified, revealing vast gardens where flowers opened and closed like eyes, and trees whose leaves shimmered with silver veins. Marco felt watched, studied, as though the city itself was weighing his worth. In the gardens, a woman appeared, taller than any human, her skin like polished ivory. eyes dark as obsidian. She did not speak, but her presence communicated thoughts directly into Marco's mind. Warnings of a great power, a knowledge forbidden to men, and the choice: leave now or claim it, risking everything. Ignoring her warning, curiosity pushed him forward. He found a library that extended impossibly upwards and downwards, filled with scrolls and books that seemed to rewrite themselves as he read. Each text contained prophecies, tales of kings, battles, and empires that never existed, or that had been erased from memory. One scroll described a plague of iron that would fall from the skies, wiping out armies. Yet only those with hearts weighed by courage could survive. Marco realized that the city was teaching him, testing him, challenging him to prove his worth. In the deepest chamber, he encountered a mirror, black as obsidian, framed in gold. When he looked into it, he didn't see himself, but 1,000 versions of himself, some dead, some victorious, some twisted by choices he hadn't yet made. A voice, soft and melodic, filled the chamber. Every path you take is both your salvation and your doom. Choose wisely, traveler. The desert watches, the sands remember, and the city demand a price. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The golden streets began to ripple like water. The city was not stable. It was a living entity, shifting and breathing. Marco realized he had only hours, maybe minutes, before the city would vanish again into the sands. With the map glowing in his hand, showing the Crimson Tower, he ran, pursued by shadows that now had teeth and claws, silent predators intent on testing his resolve. He reached the outskirts, where the sands of Nubia met the edges of the Phantom City. The tower rose before him, impossibly tall, carved in black stone with crimson veins that pulsed like a heartbeat. Marco approached, hands trembling, aware that each step was a step into either unimaginable power or certain death. The tower's door opened silently, as if inviting him, and inside he found a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. From below came a soft chanting, low and hypnotic, promising knowledge, power, and a glimpse of things mankind was not meant to see. Marco hesitated at the first step, the weight of the desert, the city, and the impossible adventure pressing down on him. Yet a strange exhilaration coursed through his veins. Beyond the darkness, he sensed secrets of empires, of kings, of the very bloodlines of men, all intertwined with curses, betrayals, and impossible feats. Every heartbeat echoed with the knowledge that this journey was changing him, binding him to a legend far larger than any tale of Europe or the Holy Lands. Marco's foot touched the first step, cold and slick as though wet with some invisible liquid. The staircase spiraled downward endlessly, each turn seeming to take him further from the world he knew. Shadows danced along the walls, stretching into shapes of creatures that might have lived before memory existed. Beasts with faces like humans, serpents with wings, birds with eyes like molten gold. Every time he blinked, the shapes shifted, sometimes appearing closer, sometimes vanishing entirely. The chanting below grew louder, but with it came a strange dissonance. It was both welcoming and menacing, as if the city itself was testing his courage. T1 landing. Marco found a chamber filled with mirrors, each reflecting not his image, but scenes from past centuries. Battles where knights fought phantoms, kings who vanished overnight, and strange ships sailing across deserts instead of oceans. He could touch the mirrors, and when he did, he felt the memories of those who had lived these moments. The heat of battle, the sting of betrayal, the thrill of forbidden knowledge. One mirror showed a man holding a glowing orb, whispering a language Marco somehow understood. Words that promised mastery over life and death, but hinted at a price no mortal could pay lightly. Continuing down, he came to a library, but this one was unlike any earthly collection. Books floated in midair, opening to pages that wrote themselves as he read. One tome described a lost civilization in the Nile Delta, whose priests had discovered a way to trap time in obsidian crystals. Another detailed a king who had used these crystals to extend life for centuries, only to be consumed by visions of his own unfulfilled desires. Marco shivered. Was this history, prophecy, or madness? The lines between reality and fiction blurred with every step he took. Suddenly, the stairwell opened into a vast hall, filled with statues of impossibly tall humans with wings, eyes glowing like molten silver. As Marco stepped inside, the figures moved slightly, their heads turning, following him with an unnatural awareness. On a dais in the center lay a sarcophagus, etched with symbols that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. A voice echoed, softer than the chanting, intimate as if speaking directly into his mind. The city grants passage only to those who face their true selves. Are you ready? Marco felt a rush of fear and anticipation. The sarcophagus lid slid open, revealing not a body, but a black void that seemed to absorb all light. From the void emerged visions, hallucinations of kingdoms falling, empires rising and crumbling, and men and women performing acts of unthinkable cunning and cruelty. One vision showed a group of children in a desert city, learning magic and science intertwined, their lessons forming the backbone of civilizations yet to come. Another showed a lone man walking across the sands carrying a crystal orb, pursued by spectral beasts with eyes like stars. Each vision was brief but vivid, burning itself into Marco's mind, leaving him questioning what was real as he reached the base of the hall. He found a spiral tunnel descending even further, walls covered in crimson runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Stepping inside, he was assaulted by visions of himself, a Marco who had failed, been betrayed, and succumbed to the city's trials, and a Marco who had succeeded, mastering knowledge that could rival the gods. He realized that each choice, each hesitation, would manifest as a reality somewhere in this city, or perhaps in some other dimension entirely. That'd be why the time he reached the lowest chamber, the air smelled of ozone and sand. There, a pedestal held an obsidian orb, the size of a man's head, throbbing with a deep crimson light. Around it swirled shadows, almost alive, forming the shapes of men and beasts from forgotten histories. The orb whispered directly to Marco's mind, offering glimpses of forbidden knowledge, secret maps of kingdoms that never existed, formulas for powers that defied nature, and glimpses into the lives of men long dead but not gone. The voice was mesmerizing, seductive, yet a part of him knew that to take the orb was to bind himself to the city forever. Just then, the floor beneath him trembled, and a crack of light split the chamber. The city above, golden and serene, seemed suddenly fragile, like a dream on the verge of waking. Marco understood that the city was alive, and it was testing him. To claim its secrets, he would need more than courage. He would need cunning, heart, and the willingness to embrace visions that might drive him mad. Marco stepped closer to the obsidian orb, its pulsating light casting shadows that writhed like living smoke. The whispers became clearer now, each syllable a melody of knowledge and madness intertwined. He could see entire civilizations unfold in the reflections of the orb. Mountains rising from seas, deserts shifting into forests, cities built overnight only to crumble in moments. And within these visions, he saw versions of himself, some triumphant, some broken, some unrecognizable, having taken paths he could barely imagine. Each possibility tugged at his mind, daring him to reach out, daring him to choose. Then the air thickened, and the shadows coalesced into a figure, a tall man, his face half-burned and skeletal, eyes glowing amber. "So you have come," the figure said, voice echoing like distant thunder. "Many have reached this point, but few have the strength to take what the city offers. Knowledge is not given freely. It must be earned and paid for." Marco felt no fear now, only a sharp, burning curiosity. "Tell me what it is," he said. "I will pay any price." The figure raised a hand, and the room shifted. Suddenly, Marco stood in a vast desert, the city nowhere in sight. Around him were mirrors, countless mirrors stretching to the horizon, each reflecting a different life, he could have lived. In one, he was a scholar who unlocked the secrets of the stars. In another, a tyrant king feared by all. In another, a wanderer who saved an entire civilization with a single choice. The figure's voice came again. Every life, every choice, every desire you've ever had. They are here. To claim the city's secret, you must face them all and choose which is truly yours. Marco moved from mirror to mirror, each step a journey through time and consequence. In one, he felt the joy of invention, of creating wonders beyond imagination. In another, he felt betrayal, watching people he loved turn against him in moments of despair. And in one particularly harrowing vision, he saw himself attempting to claim the orb too soon, his ambition untempered, only to be consumed by shadows, vanishing into a darkness without end. The lesson was clear. The city did not reward recklessness. It rewarded understanding, the wisdom to face not just the world, but oneself. Hours, or perhaps days, passed, for time was meaningless here. Marco began to recognize patterns, to see the hidden rules of the city. It thrived on the emotions and choices of those who entered. Fear, greed, curiosity, courage. The city was a living archive of human potential and folly, each trial designed to test, to sharpen, to reveal the truth about the seeker. He realized then that the orb was not simply an object. It was a conduit. It held the sum of everything the city had collected over centuries, the distilled knowledge and experiences of all who had dared to enter. Finally, Marco returned to the chamber with the orb. The figure now smiled, though it was a smile devoid of malice. "You understand now. What will you take?" Marco reached out with both hands. He did not grasp the orb with greed or fear. Instead, he allowed his mind to connect with it, to absorb the knowledge without being consumed. Images poured into him, maps of forgotten empires, the designs of machines that could harness the elements, secrets of healing that had been lost to time, and visions of distant worlds that might exist beyond their own. He felt power, yes, but more than that. He felt understanding, a clarity that reached into the deepest corners of his mind. Then came a choice. He could remain here, master of the city and its secrets, but trapped forever within its labyrinthine halls, or he could leave, carrying the knowledge with him, mortal yet free. Marco hesitated, visions of eternal dominion shimmering in his mind. But he thought of the world outside, of people who could benefit, of mysteries he could solve without being bound by shadows. With a final breath, he stepped back. The orb pulsed one last time, and the shadows receded. The city shivered, then dissolved into mist and golden sunlight. Marco found himself on a hill overlooking a valley that was at once familiar and strange. The land bathed in the early glow of dawn. In his hands, he held nothing tangible, yet he felt the weight of centuries of wisdom. The world seemed richer, every sound and color sharper, every life more vivid. And as he walked down the hill toward civilization, he knew he carried something more precious than any treasure: understanding, insight, and the knowledge that the line between myth and reality was only as strong as the stories people believed in the years that followed. Marco became a traveler, a chronicler, a secret guide to those who sought the hidden truths of the world. He spoke little of the city, for few would believe it, yet he planted subtle clues, maps, symbols, fragments of knowledge that hinted at wonders waiting to be discovered. Some dismissed him as a dreamer. Others whispered that he had touched the edge of eternity and return changed. And in quiet moments, when the wind blew just so and the shadows played at the corners of his vision, Marco could swear he heard the faint pulse of the city calling, as if reminding him that all stories, no matter how finished, were never truly over. And so the city remained, a phantom, a mystery, a crucible of the human spirit, waiting patiently for the next seeker brave enough, curious enough, and wise enough to step beyond the veil and face the trials of eternity.